Cenotaph. As the townsfolk of Barbu were stirring to life, a stranger emerged from a slowly retreating bank of early morning mist. Clad in a rumpled morning suit of noticeable vintage, and carrying a well-worn leather rucksack on his back, the stranger propelled his lanky frame toward the village square with a jaunty gait. Sporting a determined yet mirthful look comically frozen on his angular face, he insouciantly waved his monocle in a silent gesture of greeting to the gaping villagers. Young Petru, sensing that his moment to shine had at long last arrived, fell in behind the stranger like a shadow, mimicking his every gesture. As they proceeded lockstep toward the village square, Petru's two dogs joined the parade, walking on their hind legs and each waving one paw to the crowd. The dogs could not match the skills of an accomplished mimic like Petru, but theirs was a bold and worthy effort nonetheless. Unable to ignore such an extraordinary spectacle any longer, the normally sluggish residents of this isolated Carpathian village issued a rousing huzzah that drowned out even the famously loud voice of Petru's mother, who was commanding him to return home this instant. With the morning's torpor well and truly dispersed, the townsfolk linked arms and fell in behind Petru's dogs, sashaying toward the main square. It was quite a sight. Meanwhile, the worthy burghers of Barbu had already foregathered in the Café Nostrum for their customary morning discussion of the weighty affairs of business and state. As always, the top spot on the agenda was the production of wooden coffins, the town's only industry, and the source of its, or perhaps more accurately their, wealth. Mayor Popescu rose to his feet, tapped his spoon on the edge of his coffee cup, and majestically harumphed the meeting to order. "Gentlemen," he intoned to the accompaniment of satisfied murmuring, 200 years ago today, our forefathers set us upon the path to prosperity by declaring that the village of Barbu would, for all eternity, devote itself exclusively to the production of wooden coffins. The burghers grunted in assent and tapped their spoons on their coffee cups. For generations we have pursued that goal with great vigor. Barbu is known far and wide for producing the finest array of wooden coffins in the land. A box to fit every body and empty every wallet. Contented sighs filled the room. Today I can announce that our production has reached a new pinnacle. The burghers exploded into applause, vigorously nodding their heads at each other. Unfortunately, the mayor continued, an insufficient number of people are dying, and the coffins are piling up with no end in sight. Concerned groans spiraled to the ceiling, accompanied by the frenzied sucking of teeth and censorious tut-tutting, as the sour note of reality struck the burghers where it hurt most, in their assets. "Gentlemen, unless we find a way to move this dreck, we will be buried under an avalanche of coffins." The burghers coughed loudly and cleared their throats, sensing that they would soon be called upon to swallow something nasty. "There are no good options. We can continue producing coffins and let the pile grow indefinitely. We can pay the townsfolk not to work, or we can stop paying them and risk inciting a revolution. In short, we are teetering on the precipice of a slippery slope that leads inevitably to the chamber pot of financial ruin." The burghers pounded their fist on the tables and shook the rafters with chorus after chorus of contrapuntal harumphing. Fortunately, We have with us today a representative from the Ministry of Profundity who has a plan to save our sorry assets. And with that, Mayor Popescu deposited his ample rump on the near end of a long bench, thus launching to his feet the diminutive Mr. Kizyak, who had been anchoring the other end. "Gentlemen, I will be short," he piped. "In this desperate hour, we have only two choices: export coffins or import death. What shall it be?" "We want death," they all sang out, finding their voices at last. "I knew the prospect of death would rouse you to life," he said. "Now give me more passion." "Death! Death! Death!" they chanted, their chubby fists punching the air in salute. "I have a scheme," Mr. Kizyak squealed to raucous approbation. "I see a day when a Batausian coffin will adorn every street corner and every doorway in every town in the land. People will use them to furnish their living rooms, bedrooms, gardens, and garages. There is no end in sight. Long live death!" "Long live death!" they echoed. "Henceforth," he continued, "the Ministry of Adulation will declare every citizen to be a national hero, entitled to a personalized Barbuscan coffin and a multi-volume biography of their accomplishments in service to the nation, written in advance, of course, and paid for by the word." In a stage whisper, he slyly added, "They can also buy vouchers redeemable for additional coffins and biographies." After a pregnant pause, he sang out, "The competition for adulation will create an unending demand for death and words. Naturally, the authorities will dispose of any actual remains strictly on the hush-hush," Mayor Popescu tittered with relish. "We will show the world," Mr. Kizyak roared, "that this truly is the land of opportunity, where every man, woman, and child, regardless of their race, creed, color, ethnicity, or social standing, has an equal right to claim special privileges and, in return, receive absolutely nothing at enormous expense. Long live the fatuous cycle of prosperity," the burghers shouted. "Long live the scheme." "Your wish is my command," Mr. Kizyak said, bowing with great ceremony. At that moment, the townsfolk paraded past the cafe. The burghers leaped over the bowing Mr. Kizyak and ran to the window just in time to see the real source of their wealth holding hands and skipping toward the village square. There was much wailing and gnashing of teeth. When the procession of townfolk reached the village square, the stranger abruptly halted in front of the extraordinarily large and elaborately carved wooden coffin that had dominated Barbu's village square for generations, ever reminding the citizenry of the town's main industry. Pirouetting on his left foot, the stranger spun around 3 times before stopping with his right foot forward and both hands outstretched like a vaudeville singer. "Hot diggity dog," he sang out. Petra and the canines followed his lead as best they could, and the townsfolk spread out to get a good view of what was shaping up to be quite a show. Easing the rucksack from his shoulders, the stranger addressed the crowd for the first time. "My name is Venlo Gegenhuber, but you can call me Vinny." "Yo, Vinny!" the crowd responded in unison. Venlo Gegenhuber bowed and then dumped the contents of his rucksack on the ground in front of Petru. The boy's eyes grew wide with anticipation at the sight of the growing pile of gaily colored pieces of wood of various shapes and sizes. Being no one's fool, he immediately knew which end was up and began fitting the pieces together. At first, the townsfolk chuckled softly and, bending a bit at the knees, gently rocked fore and aft on their feet in smug anticipation of Petru's coming humiliation. They could not imagine this feckless little bumbler being able to make sense of anything, much less a jumble of painted sticks. But the smirks vanished from their faces when, with impressive speed, Petru presented them with the finished product, a hobby horse. Then Petru mounted the wooden stallion and rocked for all he was worth. With the crowd still focused on Petru, Venlo Gegenüber retrieved a large scroll from his bag and held it aloft like a sacrificial offering. Solemnly approaching the crowd, he unfurled it with great flourish. The crowd turned their attention from Petru to the scroll. Bracing himself, Venlo Gegenüber inhaled deeply and declaimed the Hobby Horse Manifesto. Citizens, denizens, and finger-poppin' dadas, lend me your combs. The clambake of eternal verity is a blowhole of bombacity. Only an injection of sheer lunacy can wipe out this yapping bad funk. Behold, the hobby horse. I come to wise you guys to him. The hobby horse means nothing. The hobby horse does everything. Do not be fooled by pale imitations. This is the authentic article. Archimedes rode a hobby horse. Eureka! Lady Godiva rode a hobby horse. Hooray for our side! All is overturned. Pimp your ride. Save your hide. Get out now before this crapper blows. And with that, Venlo Gegenüber nailed the scroll to the coffin of Barbu and waited. The townsfolk gaped in stunned silence for a few moments, allowing the refreshing mountain air to enter through their mouths. Then, without warning, Petru catapulted off the hobby horse and executed an aerial somersault that landed him on his feet before the crowd. You heard the man, he said, snapping his fingers. Now get to it. Seemingly overnight, an astonishing transformation took place in the once sleepy Barbu as the workers abandoned their coffin-making tools and took up the manufacture of hobby horses. Giddy with excitement, the children, led by Petru, found new uses for the large pile of unsold coffins, converting some into traps for rabbits and turning others into rowboats. It was all great fun. The final coup de grace took place at the first annual Barbu Q, when the townsfolk roasted sausages over burning coffins while listening to Petru's hobby horse singing, "Back in the saddle again." At long last, a great wave of creativity and optimism swept over the land, and all seemed right with the world. Back at the Café Nostrum, it did not take long for the burghers to reach their wits' end, as it was a very short journey indeed. With their left arms behind their backs and their right hands stroking their chins, they leaned forward in dense contemplation and followed each other around in a circle like circus elephants, walking trunk to tail. Mayor Popescu and Mr. Kizyak led the procession. And that's how Barbu's best and brightest spent the remainder of their days, traveling in circles. For such is the fate of big wheels. Soon there were sightings of a most extraordinary nature all across Europe. In Budapest, Bucharest, Prague, Warsaw, Berlin, and elsewhere, bystanders reported seeing Venlo Gegenüber driving a lilac-covered Duesenberg through a triumphal arch of scrolls. Crowds greeted him with fireworks displays and cheered, "All hail the Messiah of Meshuggah." Trailing the Duesenberg was a tulip-festooned wagon upon which Petru rode his singing hobby horse. At this point, the editor paused in his reading and removed his glasses. He stared at the ceiling for a few moments and then gently coughed. Sir, many strange things happened in 1989, but the idea that this Gegenüber fellow spread revolution throughout the capitals of Europe? That's ridiculous. Not to mention the singing hobby horse. I'm afraid this just won't do. We have our reputations to consider. Petru was not surprised. A generation had passed, and now this new generation, marinated in a treacly slurry of processed advertising and homogenized multitasking, and cocooned in a half-baked meringue of manufactured outrage, was itself desperately in need of a fresh injection of sheer lunacy. Rising from his chair, Petru dropped on the editor's desk a charred piece of wood with a large iron nail running through it. What's this? The editor asked. The final nail in the coffin of Barbu, Petru said. I drove it in myself, just before we set it ablaze. On that note, Petru departed in silence, leaving the editor to his thoughts. This story is dedicated to the memory of Tristan Tzara, Romanian writer and co-creator of Dada.